Hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. If that ever changes, let me know. Welcome to Cliff Palace. In 1888, Richard Weatherall and Charlie Mason are looking for a stray cow. It's a December morning, and there's fog in the area. You see, well, the reason for the fog is that the canyon itself, bottom, is warmer than the air up top on the mesas, and when they collide, it creates fog. And thus it's foggy as they're coming up this way, this part, what we now call Cliff Canyon. And they look up and to the left and the fog clears at just the right moment and they see it. They see Cliff Palace, and they wouldn't call it Cliff Palace, they didn't call it back then. And they have discovered the cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde. Or had they? You just say that you've discovered something implies that this area had been lost or forgotten. That couldn't be further from the truth. This area, the ancestral Puebloans may not have been living in this area since around 1300, but their descendants over the centuries would come back to pay tribute to those that had gone before, to those who had created these cliff dwellings. The Utes, Navajo, and Apache moved into this area in the 14 and 15, oh I'm sorry, you can't see on the wall now. Sorry, couldn't quite tell. The Utes, Navajo, and Apache moved into the area in the 14 and 1500s, and they knew of these cliff dwellings. So the last group to figure out that there were cliff dwellings was here was the Anglo-Americans. So it's more apt to say that they rediscovered this area. And immediately, this rediscovery opens up a new chapter for the Mesa Verde area. And immediately, two questions arise. The Anglo-Americans want to know two things. Where did the people go, and why did they leave? Now, where did the people go? Where the inhabitants left and went to is the easier of the two questions. But yet, it's a question that won't be answered until the 1960s, 70s, almost a full century later. Now, when the ancestral Puebloans left the area, they split into 21 different groups. 19 of the 21 went to southern and central New Mexico, one went to southern Arizona, and one went to West Texas. But the Anglo-Americans weren't willing to listen to anyone at the time. You see, the descendants of the ancestral Puebloans introduced him and say, "Hi, here we are. Our descendants live there." Guy was like, and the Rangers were still at the time ago, and nobody knows what happened. And they're like, "Hi, hello, how many times can I read this, fellas?" Until finally, the Park Service, the government, the researchers, everyone started saying this. "Oh, there you are. Where have you been all these decades?" Never mind that. We have so much to tell you. Now, why they left the area is complex. It's the more complex of the two questions because the ancestral Puebloans are an oral society. They passed everything on orally. They did not have a written language. So there's nothing for the Anglo-Americans, the researchers, to fact check, to cross-reference. And the problem with oral histories isn't just the fact that there's potential for variations in the story from one generation to the next. There's also the issue that oral history is a lot more personal than a book. You start challenging a book and maybe the author will get a little upset because you have challenged his life work there trying to tear it to shreds. But when you say to a face to that person who's telling you the story, you know, that doesn't quite sound what I know of. I think you got the story wrong. There's going to be a lot more ill will generated. And so, there's that issue. And then there's another issue, beyond the oral history issue. It's the cultural one. If you were to ask a Puebloan today, why did their ancestors leave the area, they'd say, it was their time to go. They wouldn't mention anything about drought. They wouldn't mention anything about deforestation or about hunting. All that mattered was, it was their time to go. Now, because we don't have any written records to fact check, because they're an oral history society, we can't say with 100% certainty why they left the area. We have to do it based on what we know of the area and what we've discovered. So, first off, drought. We know that the climate of the area is a dry climate. There is no steady source of water within the boundaries of Mesa Verde. The closest source of water, of steady water, is the Mecas River, which forms the eastern border to the park. And they have been living in this area since around 500 AD, and they've been growing their crops since around 550 AD on the mesa tops, corn, beans, squash. And because this is a dry climate, not a lot of rainfall, 18 inches a year, they're storing their food for many, many years, 3 to 5 years actually, for a time in which case there's not going to be a lot of rainfall. And they're also going to be storing water for a time period in which case there's not going to be a lot of rainfall. From the year 1200 to 1300 was not a good century. There were 8 years of exceptionally good harvest, 19 years of exceptionally poor harvest, and the rest of the years went the majority being And from 1274 to 1299, there was a 25-year drought. Now this society is not a hand-to-mouth society. They were not just barely subsisting. They were trading for luxury goods as far south as present-day Mexico. They're trading macaw feathers, cacao, chocolate, seashells, copper bells, turquoise. They were getting all of this stuff. And if you have the wealth to do that, it shows your society must be doing fairly well. But if you can't feed your people, it doesn't matter how wealthy you are, you're in trouble. Another reason as to why they could potentially left the area is deforestation. There are 2 primary species of trees in this area, pinyon pine, which is up top, and Utah juniper right here. They are using both species of wood for construction, for heating, for cooking as a food source. Pinyon pine nuts up top. Now these 2 species of trees take 4 centuries to grow back after you cut it down. So, and there's no records, of course, they didn't leave any records of them knowing that it took 4 centuries for a tree to grow back. And of course, they are clear cutting the mesa tops so they could, build their Pueblo villages, get their fields of corn, beans, squash. So that's more trees you're cutting down, and, well, problems will eventually rise in later generations, later centuries. Another reason as to why they could potentially left the area is overhunting. They were supplementing their diet with mule deer, elk, and bighorn sheep. We know this because we look at their trash. Now you probably wonder, it's probably something worth wondering about what we'll say about us a few centuries from now when scientists take a look at our trash piles. But we know this. We know at the top of their trash piles, we don't see the remains of these animals. Only at the bottom, which tells us they aren't finding them. Maybe it was the drought that drove them away. Maybe it was overhunting. Maybe it was a combination of 2. Hard to say exactly. What we can say is in the year 1300, the majority of the families living throughout the entirety of the Four Corners region, that is southern Colorado, central and northern New Mexico, northeast part of Arizona, and southeast part of Utah, pick up and leave. And when they pick up and leave, they only can take what they carry in their backs and in their hands. Everything else, no matter how important it was, had to be left behind because they had no wagons, they had no beasts of burden, they had no trains, planes, buses, cars, ships, boats, all of that, none of that. So which means Cliff Palace, like all the other 599 cliff dwellings in this park, along with countless Pueblo villages on the mesa tops, have been chock full of stuff. And for 588 years, that stuff lay undisturbed until Richard Weatherall and Charlie Mason rediscovered Cliff Palace and herald a new chapter to this area. Now you're probably thinking, really? No one took anything? The Utes, Navajo, Apache? No. These places were considered houses of the dead. It was culturally taboo, forbidden for them to come into this area. So the Anglo-Americans were the first. So, Richard Weatherall is an amateur archaeologist. He's self-taught. And he is going to conduct a great deal of excavations in the area. He's going to discover 182 different sites throughout this area, including Cliff Palace. But the thing is, people are going to start visiting. They want to know more about this area. And so Richard Weatherall is going to allow them to follow him on his expeditions. And of course, it gets a little boring if you're just following him. So he's going to allow them to help him excavate the area. And their prize is what they get to find, is what they get to keep. You're probably thinking, how could he do this? What was going on? Well, he was looking to Europe. Europe? What about America? What about the American archaeological program? Come on. Well, the American archaeological program was too young. It was just in infancy. There wasn't anyone he could really talk to beyond the Smithsonian. Well, didn't he write a letter to the Smithsonian asking for help? Yes. He wrote a letter to the Smithsonian asking how to conduct proper excavations in this area. The letter lands on the chief archaeologist's desk. Hooray! Well, the fact that he's the only chief archaeologist's desk means he gets it by default. But you know what? The chief archaeologist opens the letter and he thinks one word: rival. You see, the chief archaeologist wants the Smithsonian to fund his expedition to the Mesa Verde area. If he helped this yahoo, this amateur, do his job, the Smithsonian will be less likely to fund his expedition because now they can count on him, Richard Weatherall, to do their job. Well, he wasn't going to let that happen, so he writes a letter back. And it's a very snarky reply. don't even bother. Well, he was going to bother. He wants to do this. It just means the Smithsonian has denied his aid, and he has no choice but to look at what's going on in Europe, and he is copying it. Now, another group of people coming are fortune seekers. You see, didn't you know? This is an outpost of the Aztec Empire. No. Montezuma, the last Aztec emperor? Yes. The gold. Think of all the gold that's here. I'll get the dynamite. And that's what they do. They bring their dynamite and start blowing holes in these walls to find the gold that doesn't exist. They are assuming that this is an outpost of the Aztec Empire. They are completely wrong, but they just can't conceive of the idea that this is a different civilization. The third group of people to come to this area are the tourists, just in general, and they were not as well behaved as y'all were. They would come up here, and things took them a multi-day journey. For one thing, they didn't have a paved road. Their cars were wagons, drawn by horses, and it takes them time to get up here. And they want to spend as much time as they could, recoup their time spent getting up here. And there's a very infamous photo, in my opinion, of a family dressed in their Sunday finest by modern standards, and they're sitting on a wall here in Cliff Palace. To the right of the gentleman is an open can of food. To the left of the woman is a saucer of tea. There is so much going wrong. They are sitting on a wall that's not been maintained for 588 years. Harvey wants an accident to happen, something to happen to sort of karma. Unfortunately, that would do a lot more damage to the site than sitting on it, potentially. And then it's the fact that they brought food and sugary drinks into the site. They're asking for animals to come in the area. And what do all tourists want at the end of a journey, good or bad? Souvenir. Correct, a souvenir. They want something to remember the journey by, and so you're going to look around for that hand-sculpted, hand-decorated pot. And then you're going to find it. And they're going to take it. And this is a horrible, horrible thing, because these items represent the history of the people in this area. They have no written records for us to use, so it's the items that can tell a story, and the items still even today, even when we get oral histories from them. And when you take stuff from the site, a little bit of the story is lost. Now, no one thought anything of that, taking stuff. You see, it wasn't until 1891 that a fulcrum point is reached, when Gustav Nordenskjöld of Sweden arrives. He's a big patron of the arts. When I say patron, he's taught. He's gone to universities, he's geologist, archaeologist, biologist. He's pretty much a Renaissance man in his degrees. He has the time and effort, time and more important, wealth to do that. He's a baron. Now, he falls in love with this area, and he's going to teach Richard Weatherall the latest and greatest in European techniques. But the thing is, while he's doing that, he's setting items aside so he can, take back to Sweden with him. At the end of his journey, he's going to the Durango Railroad. And he's going to ask them to ship his items east. The Durango Railroad, they're going to take one look, and then they're going to start talking amongst each other. Like, he has that much stuff? How many boxcars is that going to fill? It's going to fill 3 boxcars. He has that much stuff. Is it even legal to do this? Don't know. Stalled him. I'll call the feds. They call the federal government. A deputy federal marshal arrests him for thievery of the ruins. But there's one teeny tiny white elephant in the room problem. What is it?
It's not illegal.
Yes, not illegal. Wait, you said it, or do you? Ah, you did. Or do you want a sticker? Yes, you do.
I'd rather have a clay pot.
I'm sorry. You should have done that before 1906. There was no law against it. And so, well, I suppose we could find you just some random clay. You can make a clay pot that way. It's always that way. But there's no law against it. Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am. You're going to have to come forward. Get out of that room. There was no law against it. And thus, he was able to be allowed, he was allowed, grudgingly, to take his collection to Sweden. Well, unfortunately, he was getting broke after the end of his journey. I'm afraid his love of the place didn't exactly make him any money. So he quickly flipped the collection and is currently in a museum in Helsinki, Finland, dedicated to his honor. Now, this enrages the American population. It's one thing for an American to be stealing from America. It's another thing when a foreigner does the same thing. In 1894, Virginia McClurg founded the Cliff Dwellers Association with the intentions of preserving this area. She wants this area to become a national park. And on June 29th of 1906, Virginia McClurg's dream that she started and then came out against in the last coming months passes. You're like, wait a minute, you're gonna have to explain that. Virginia McClure distrusted the federal government, but the federal government was the only way she perceived that could protect this area. It wasn't until, around final months leading up to June 29th of 1960, she said, wait a minute. We can turn this into a state park. All right, I'm against this effort, and she turns the entire initiative on its head. Thankfully, though, Lucy Peabody takes command of the initiative, and Congress wasn't quite, was more resilient in that manner, and so they continued to press forward, and June 29th, Mesa Verde National Park's enabling legislation passed through the Congress, and the very first national park dedicated to cultural heritage is created. Now, we have a little bit of time. Excellent, I'm ahead of schedule. There's one more bill I want to discuss. You're like, oh no, I hear the nightmares. All that laws, no, yes. June 8th of 1906, the Lacey Act is passed. You're probably thinking, Michael, we are incredibly intelligent individuals. We know a lot. But Congress has passed hundreds, if not thousands of laws over the last few centuries. Help us out here. You probably know the bill by its more famous name, the American Antiquities Act of 1906. This bill is a landmark bill for preservation and conservation. So let's discuss it. There are 4 sections to it. It's like, oh no, you're not going to do that to us, are you? No, I'm not. We're just going to discuss the first 2. You're like, oh, that's so much better. It is. First section. Makes it a federal offense, a federal crime, to loot or damage any prehistoric site, Native American, on federally owned or controlled land. This bill, that part of the section, makes it illegal for anyone to loot or damage prehistoric sites. I'm pretty much just repeating what it was, but since the entire West is pretty much owned by the federal government, pretty much the entire West is protected under this bill, which means Northern Shoal be able to exploit that loophole, take his 3 boxcars out of the country. That's illegal. That loophole is closed. The second section, the president is allowed to designate sites of prehistoric value and or site of historical and scientific importance as a national monument, with the understanding that they be the smallest size possible.